After a summer in which the NBA trade market has seemingly been held on a chokehold, it feels like things are beginning to stir up in regards to Damian Lillard and James Harden. I'm here to break down the latest rumblings, the reports, and just kind of take a step back and look at the facts of the situation in this video. Thank you guys once again for tuning back into Sixers Digest. Before I get fully into it, I would like to recommend that you guys hit that subscribe button. Right now, 91.4% of you watching this video have not subscribed yet. We got a bunch of awesome plans coming for the season that I want to get everybody involved in. The excitement for the season beginning to build, training camp right around the corner, and we do have some news on the James Harden and Damian Lillard front and why they may be more connected than we even realize. So to dive fully into it, the reports are beginning stirring up is there's a ton of just noise popping up regarding the Damian Lillard and James Harden situation. For starters, we have this report from Kyle Neubeck, which said, quote, "Here's what I can tell you. I know for sure that the Sixers have certainly talked to the Blazers about Dame at different points throughout the offseason. Now, this should not be a major surprise to Sixers fans. That for starters, we know who Daryl Morey is when it comes to getting star players. We know that Damian Lillard is the biggest fish on the market. And I also would like to add some context to that quote that immediately following it from Kyle Neubeck, who, by the way, I would consider the number one Sixers go-to when it comes to beat reporters. He's the guy with the most intel when it comes to Daryl Morey's side of things and just is on top of it from a professionalism standpoint, a guy that is on the scene night in and night out. But he follows up that quote right there by saying that I don't know how serious those conversations were, that Daryl is a guy that keeps tabs on everybody. He's constantly checking in. There's constantly conversations being had, and this is not necessarily something that he would consider has his antennas up for a deal going down immediately. But it is worth noting that those conversations are at least being had. And the biggest fact of this situation is that Damian Lillard and James Harden are the two biggest fish on the market and the two biggest things that the NBA world is waiting for. Now, another report that surfaced here regarding the Damian Lillard situation as a whole is this from here. We have from Danny Meringue of 108.5 The Fan that said the Sixers are among multiple teams that have, quote, thrown their hat in the ring to acquire Dame Lillard or help facilitate a 3 or 4 team trade. Now, that is the biggest point that I want to bring up and why I think they're so connected is there's a lot of moving parts to all of this, and each team involved has different goals. For starters, the Damian Lillard situation as a whole, that we know they basically have their future in hand, that Scoot Henderson is already on roster. Shaedon Sharpe is already a long-term part of their team. Anthony Simons is a crucial part of this team. The reason that I think that's a stalemate in regard to the Sixers is Tyrese Maxey. First off, you can have your own feelings on whether or not you would trade Tyrese Maxey for Damian Lillard. I frankly don't think it's as simple of a decision as many people make it. And if you want to pin me down right now, I believe that we flash forward 3 years from now, and Tyrese Maxey will be a straight-up better basketball player than Dame Lillard at each of their points in his career. I'm not saying at his peak he will be what Dame Lillard will be, but I think the fall-off for Dame is pretty much here, that he is an aging, old guard, undersized guy, and they just don't tend to age well at the end of his career. And on the opposite side of these things, Tyrese Maxey continues to take leaps and bounds forward. So I understand the logic between making an all-in move when it comes to these Sixers, but Tyrese Maxey is a different level of guy that I think should be weighed in these situations. Now, why I do think that is connected is that I don't know exactly what the Trailblazers are looking for, but you would think a rebuilding package when it comes to young players, picks, those aren't great things these Sixers have to offer. Nonetheless, that the James Harden situation still has to come to some sort of solution there. So I do see some sort of 3 or 4 team deal ultimately coming through this. What I do think is interesting is I think there's 2 ways that this could happen. I think for number one, that there could be an absolute NBA blockbuster deal where both Harden and Lillard are moved in the same deal, and there's either 3 or 4 teams to help facilitate this. I see this going as far as like James Harden ending up in Los Angeles, Damian Lillard in Miami, and then a couple teams in the mix to kind of facilitate it, send the parts, whether this be the Utah Jazz, who Jake Fisher have mentioned, or just some of these teams looking to pick up some additional assets or looking to move guys. It feels like it's going to take multiple teams. The other thing that I think is worth noting is now that we're beginning to hear about these other teams, the Toronto Raptors, the Chicago Bulls, interested in the Dame Lillard sweepstakes, I'm curious if they now begin to get dead set on making a splash this offseason. That for the most part, it has been a very quiet NBA offseason. We've heard all the rumors. We've heard all the reports. We've seen nonstop swirls of those. But for actual things happening, it's been quiet. So it feels like we're due for a little bit of noise coming up, especially with training camp right here. Now, another report that I want to pull up from Jake Fisher here of Yahoo Sports, and this was a kind of toning down the situation a little bit, and this was in regards, he had a ton of good nuggets about the Dame Lillard situation in this article, and also mentioned James Harden. So in this blurb here, he says, Philadelphia staffers, meanwhile, can talk themselves into the idea of Harden reporting to training camp, playing for a title, hopeful, and therefore playing his way into the trade value the Sixers require to relinquish the All-Star. How realistic is that? Well, Harden has already claimed that he'll never be part of an organization that Philadelphia president Daryl Morey is a part of. So I think we can kind of take with that. That's no new context, but it is the reality of the situation. I think the biggest thing to take away from that report specifically is that the Sixers are not quite pressed against the timeline that the Trailblazers be. And Fisher even goes on to clarify this in this report here, where he says, since the initial July talks stemming from Lillard's trade request did not result in a deal to his preferred destination of Miami or another potential landing spot such as Brooklyn, the beginning of training camp and media day, October 2nd, has loomed as the unofficial deadline for Portland to part with Lillard and start a new Blazers era in earnest. That's even more so than the ongoing dynamic in Philadelphia, where James Harden still hopes to be moved to the LA Clippers, sources said. So it is clear that James Harden remains with the goal of ending up in Los Angeles. What I do think there is to take away is that the Sixers and Trailblazers seem to be operating on different timelines. And for what it's worth, as much as they are tied together from the NBA standpoint and how they are the biggest players in the trade market right now and will have a major impact on that, the James Harden and Damian Lillard situations are vastly different. For starters, Damian Lillard has played out his entire career in Portland. There's way more of a Portland owing him a little bit, and I don't think the franchise is going to give in and just send him to Miami for pennies on the dollar in the way that Lillard seems to want. And in fact, I do think that has rubbed the Trailblazers the wrong way because we're seeing reports of them not being any traction with Miami, them interested in other teams, all those things. That's all fair and good, but it does feel like they have much more of a long-term core established. They have pieces in place, and that there is a little more loyalty there on both sides between Lillard. That I think the Trailblazers are much more likely to do right by Damian Lillard by sending him where he wants or sending him out of the organization than I think is the case with the Sixers and James Harden. When it comes to the Sixers, James Harden, there's no need for loyalty here. That the feelings are already hurt. It could not be more clear for how James Harden feels about Daryl Morey. And Daryl Morey, what we know about him is he's not going to take a loss on this deal, that he will hold out until he gets what he perceives as fair value. And the biggest issue with that is Daryl Morey likely values James Harden higher than anyone else in the entire NBA right now. So what does that fair value look like to him, or at least has throughout the entirety of James Harden's career? So I do think the different timelines are notable, and that I think shifts it to being more likely to where Dame Lillard is the blockbuster deal and James Harden could be next up on the market. And that I don't think that's a bad plan from the Sixers standpoint, that if you can capitalize on getting the secondary goods or the next best offer, what if in this situation, Portland gets sick of all the Miami nonsense, that they need to, they're not going to settle for the deal that Miami is offering, which if we're being realistic, can't be the strongest offer available. Now, Damian Lillard's camp has kind of campaigned and kept this as a way of steering things, that like they've mentioned how he will only report to Miami camp, a bunch of reports like that, a bunch of just, we've seen this throughout the entire offseason at this point. Does that steer the Trailblazers away from trading to another team? Or I guess the bigger question is, does that steer other teams from putting a realistic offer for Dame Lillard? But let's say that's the case. Let's say the Toronto Raptors sweep in here and trade for Damian Lillard. What does that mean for James Harden? If you're looking at a team like the Miami Heat, they have to do something. They lost Max Strus in free agency. They lost Gabe Vincent in free agency. Those were their two primary starting guards throughout the length of the playoff next year. They really have not replaced them. They need to do something. And as much as there's going to be a battle between the Heat culture and the James Harden culture, he makes a lot of sense from a basketball standpoint. As far as that team needs another ball handler, they need some more shot creation. Those are the things that they were lacking in last year's playoff run. And those are things that James Harden still can bring to a team at a fairly high level. So I do see a world where that could be a potential outcome, but that doesn't mean anything for sure. And from the Sixers standpoint specifically, I'm sure that they're having these conversations regarding Dame Lillard. I can't quite wrap my mind around a realistic package that sends Lillard to Philly. It would have to involve Tyrese Maxey, which, again, you can feel how you feel about this. The other point that I think is crucial to bring up in this is Maxey really doesn't make sense for the Trailblazers either. Why are you adding another undersized guard to that mix? If they're trying to build for the long term, Tyrese Maxey, I get it from a value standpoint, and I get it if you want to, I guess, kick the can down the line a little bit and now have this other trade chip that you can look to upgrade with. But I think he's just better than a guy that should be considered in that just keep for a trade chip category. He's a legitimate building block. And B, what does this do for your future? How does this make the Trailblazers better moving forward? Again, I get the value, but from a basketball standpoint, it just doesn't make sense. So what does happen from here? For now, we still keep hearing these rumors swirling. We know that Daryl Morey is going to be working the phones. It feels like we're getting closer to an outcome here. and it feels like the James Harden and Dame Lillard situations are going to have an impact on each other. Whether this be by them being finalized in the same deal, whether this be by James Harden climbing up the pecking order once a Dame Lillard deal is done, it feels like there's a connection here. So for now, we sit and wait, but it feels we're getting closer and closer to the end of this offseason episode. That it has been nothing but rumors, nothing but reports, and it feels like finally we're getting closer to knowing what these rosters will look like. Appreciate you guys for tuning in this video. Make sure to drop a like on the video. Once again, subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. I want to know if you would be willing to consider trading Tyrese Maxey for Damian Lillard. I'll go as far as to say at this point, I'm out on it, that I don't want that to be the case. I would rather keep Tyrese Maxey, but I want to hear your thoughts from you guys. So once again, thanks, and I will talk with you next time. Peace.